Dear Lord, thank you that we've been gathered here today. Thanks for the music team and all the stuff going on. I pray that you will help the knowledge that Izzy's going to expound to be memorized by our heads so that we can remember and apply it in our lives. Amen.
Amen. Cool. Okay, so we didn't make a lot of progress last week, which is disappointing. We really I think we're going to finish Romans 11 today. Hopefully. I did say that last week, but somehow we made very, very little progress. So anyway, we're going to finish chapter 11. Quick recap. This is where we finished last week. So I'm not going to go through like all the olive tree and stuff like that. We kind of had got through that. This is where we finished last week. Paul says, I don't want you to be ignorant, that's nice, right? I don't want to be ignorant either. So Paul doesn't want us to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers and sisters. And the reason he doesn't want us to be ignorant of the mystery is so that we won't be conceited. What does it mean to be conceited? Arrogant, proud, looking down on people, that kind of thing, right? So he says he doesn't want us to be ignorant about this thing, because if we are ignorant of it, if we don't understand it, we're going to be conceited. And that basically goes back to what he'd been talking about earlier about boasting over the broken branches, that we'll basically be arrogant with respect to Israel. And he says, I don't want you to be ignorant of this mystery so that you may not be conceited. A partial hardening has happened to Israel until the full number of Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved. And what we said is what he's saying there is, we've already talked about this, Israel have been partially hardened. They've been blinded. They don't know the truth, right? And it's partial because it's not all Jewish people. Paul was Jewish, and there have been Jewish believers ever since. So it's not all of Israel that God is that are hardened. But it's also not forever. It's partial in terms of time. And we know that because there's an until. There is a partial hardening that has happened to Israel until something else happens. And it's until the full number of Gentiles has come in. Come into what? Which makes them a part of what? The church of God. And so there's this idea that, and talk with Xavier on Friday night, we were talking about this a little bit, that the church, the body of Christ, the bride of Christ, seems to be a unique thing in God's plan. And there were believers before the church began, and there will be believers after the church is complete that are not a part of the church. That the church seems to be a unique thing that is made up of Jews and Gentiles. And apparently, there is a number of Gentiles who are going to be a part of the church. And once that number is full, well, not full as in like, sorry, you missed out, it's full. But God knows how many Gentiles are going to be saved. How many Gentiles are through their own free choice going to become a part of his body. And once that's complete, then his church is done, right? And then that's when we think the rapture comes. We're taken out of the way, and then all of Israel will be saved. And so then God's focus shifts back to the nation of Israel and the people of Israel. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what we looked at. And then he quotes a couple of verses from Isaiah that make that point. He says, as it's written, the deliverer, the word is Goel, it's the Redeemer. The Redeemer will come out of Zion. He will remove ungodliness from Jacob. And this is my covenant with them when I take away their sins. And so God basically says, like this, I've made this promise. I am going to take away the sins of Jacob, the sins of Israel, and forgive them. Okay. So that's what we got up to. Now, when do you think this happens? When do you think all of Israel will be saved? Thinking back to our timeline.
After the Great Tribulation.
So I'm not 100% sure. It could be that it happens somewhere in here, in this 7-year period. But personally, I think it probably happens at that end point when Jesus returns. That it happens with the second coming of Christ and is fulfilled ultimately through the millennial kingdom. It's when the Jewish people are saved. Okay. Now, I also said at the end of the lesson last week that I really encourage you guys to try to get an understanding of this timeline. Like, try to get it clear in your mind, because the Bible arguably says more about that 7-year period and the times that come after it, particularly the millennial kingdom, that period of time, than any other time in history. So it's obviously important, right? And what that means is, like, there is so much of the Bible that is about this time, which means if you don't understand that time, you're not going to understand a huge amount of the Bible as well as you could or should, right? Now, of course, this has nothing to do with salvation. You don't need to understand God's plans for the future in order to confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart that He raised Him from the dead. So it's nothing to do with salvation. But there's so much else in God's Word that, like I said, it won't really make sense to you unless you understand what God's plan is. And it's a plan that He obviously wants us to know, because otherwise He wouldn't have put it there, right? He wouldn't have told us so much about it. Why do you think God wants us to know, like in general terms, what the future holds? Because it's cool. It is probably not, yeah, maybe a little bit. It is cool. But what do you think the value is to us in knowing this? Hope how? Why?
Hope that everything that's wrong now will be solved.
Yeah?
Hope that Jesus will come back.
Yeah? Yeah. So, like, in my experience, it actually brings quite a lot of comfort and quite a lot of peace. Because, I don't know if you've noticed, but the world's getting kind of crazy right now, right? And there's no shortage of people telling you you need to be worried, even terrified about the future, right? If nuclear war with Russia doesn't destroy us all, then climate change will. Yeah? And so everybody's stressed, everybody's anxious about the future. But that's not what God wants for us. Jesus says, do not let your heart be troubled. Don't be anxious. You believe in God, believe in me. And so basically, He's saying, and I think with all of this, God's point is like, don't worry about all the things that people out there, that the world out there is saying. I've told you what's going to happen. I've told you how the story ends. And that's not how the story ends, you know? Yeah. But anyway, that wasn't really my point. The main point, sorry? The main point is that once you understand God's plan for the future, you'll start to see that plan woven throughout His scriptures. Like, it's literally everywhere. And so much of God's word will start to come to life for you because you'll actually understand it. It'll make sense. You'll get what He's talking about, which is exciting. You'll also see that God's promises to Israel aren't hyperbole. He wasn't exaggerating, right? Or speaking in some figurative, like, vague way. He actually plans to do the things that He said He was going to do for them. God actually intends to save the Jewish people, both physically and spiritually, and to rule all the nations from Jerusalem in the land of Israel, which is even more exciting. And so This morning we have a little bit more time because although we didn't finish last week, we did actually get through quite a chunk of it, and the part that's left, there wasn't that much. So I figured we might explore this a little bit more this morning. That, the millennial kingdom, basically, God's ultimate plans for Israel and plans for the world. Question is, where does one start? Because you can literally pick almost any prophet in the Bible, and you'll be able to find in there is stuff about the tribulation probably, and definitely Jesus' ultimate salvation, or the ultimate salvation of the Jewish people, which is kind of the point that I'm trying to make. But I figured we could start in what is quite a spooky passage in the book of Ezekiel called the Valley of the Dry Bones. Have you heard it? Heard of it? No? Some of you, yes. Some of you will have read it in Sunday school, but probably won't really have understood what it was about. It's quite cool. Do any of you remember what it's about?
There's like a valley full of like thousands and thousands of bones, and then God, I think, knits the bones together, and then puts flesh on them, and then breathes life into them, and it turns out to be a massive army or something.
So I don't know if you noticed, but in the last song we sang this morning, it said, "You turn bones into armies." Comes from this passage. Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Which song did you say?
You turn graves into gardens. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah.
I can just imagine the team beforehand being like, "Hey, I'm gonna."
Yeah, no, it's total coincidence. I was like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. Okay, so yes, exactly. So there's this prophet Ezekiel, and he says he's taken by the Spirit of God, and he finds himself in this huge valley that is filled with with human bones, right? And he's walking around this valley, and he notices how old and dry they are. Yeah? Making sense? Visualize that, right? And then God asks Ezekiel quite a strange question. He said to me, "Son of man, can these bones live?" Answer? Well, obvious answer is no, right? These are dead. And he's made the point that these bones are old and dry. They've been there for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. You can imagine, like the archaeologists brushing off the dirt from the bones. That's like really old, dead bones. And God says, can these bones live? And the obvious answer is no, of course not. But Ezekiel has a much smarter answer than that. He says, "Sovereign Lord, you know." Right? Then God tells Ezekiel that he must prophesy over these bones. He must say to them, "Dry bones, listen to what the Lord says. I'm going to place tendons and muscles on you, and I'm going to cover you over with skin. I'm going to cause breath to come into you, and you will live. Then you will know that I am the Lord." So Ezekiel prophesied as he was commanded, and it says there was a sound when I prophesied. I heard a rattling, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And as I watched, I saw tendons on them. Then muscles appeared, and skin covered over them from above, but there was no breath in them. So you can picture what's going on now. Now he's surrounded by bodies, not bones, but the bodies are dead. They have no breath in them. Yes. And other, yeah. So, okay, that's where we are. Anyway, Ezekiel goes on. He says, "Then God said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, son of man, and say to the breath, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these corpses so that they may live. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and the breath came into them. They lived and stood on their feet, an extremely great army." Okay, still kind of creepy. Like, what's going on, right? What is God doing here? Well, God tells us. He said to me, "Son of man, these bones are all the house of Israel. Look, they are saying, our bones are dry, our hope has perished, we are cut off." Cut off from what? Life, in a way. I mean, yes, they're dead, but they represent Israel, right? And Israel is saying, we have no hope. We're as good as dead. We've been cut off. Cut off from what?
I think when, like in the Old Testament, when they're like, they would say someone's cut off from Israel, I mean like they're no longer part of the congregation and they can't like attend to the temple and stuff. So I think that means cut off from God, cut off from salvation. And because they're dead, it seems like there's no hope of it changing.
Couldn't have said it better. And that's basically what you said as well. And if you think, what are we studying? Where are we studying? Romans 11. What's Romans 11 all about? Israel. The branches that have been cut off, right? Broken off the tree. They feel separated from God. Cut off from their relationship to God. All those promises that God had made to them. And like when I read the story and all these piles of bones, I can't help but think of the Holocaust. And I don't know if you guys have seen the pictures of the just like piles and piles of bodies, barely more than skin and bone. And when I read those words, our bones are dry, our hope has perished, we're cut off. Like there's utter despair. And I can't help but like hear the hearts of the Jewish people in the camps, in the gas chambers, crying out like this, right? There's a parallel passage in Isaiah that I think is also quite heartbreaking. We've looked at it before. It says, Zion said, this is it, the Jews, Israel say, the Lord has abandoned me. The Lord has forgotten me. Which is exactly the same heart that they're expressing, right? And God says to them, can a woman forget her baby who nurses at her breast? Can she withhold compassion from the child she has born? And again, the answer to that should be no. But realistically, it's a messy world. And maybe, right? These things happen. And so God says, even if she were to forget, I could never forget you. Look, I've inscribed your name on my palms. Your walls are constantly before me. Which, like I said, it's the same thing. The people of Israel think that God has abandoned them, that he's forgotten them. And like I said, in those, you look at Holocaust and potentially, there's maybe never a time in the history, although they've had plenty of times in history where they could have felt like that. Perhaps never more so than there. They say God's abandoned us, like looking at our situation, and one day Jesus is going to show the Jewish people the holes in his hands and say, I never forgot you, right? I was suffering with you. I was suffering for you. Yeah. So anyway, we go back to Ezekiel. God says to them, Son of man, these bones are all the house of Israel. Look, they are saying, our bones are dry, our hope has perished. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and tell them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Look, I am about to open your graves, and I will raise you from your graves, my people. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and raise you from your graves, my people. And so, in the midst of this tragedy, while the people of Israel are saying, our bones are dry, our hope is perished, God says, I'm about to open your graves. I'll bring you back to the land of Israel. You know what's amazing?
Saved them from the Holocaust and brought them into their nation.
Well, a third of them weren't saved from the Holocaust. 2/3 survived it. And then less than 3 years, almost to the day, 3 years after the Holocaust ended and the last camp was liberated, Israel was reborn. And God has been bringing them back to their land ever since, right? Which is pretty cool. Yeah. Now, if you remember the prophecy with the bones, it happened in 2 stages, right? First, bodies, but they're still dead, right? And then the breath is breathed into them. And that's also, I think that's exactly where we are today. God has raised Israel out of the grave. They're standing on the earth again as a nation. But spiritually, they're not alive. They are a secular nation. Technically, they don't officially believe in God. But that's like a yet, right? Because that's the first stage. God lifts them out of their graves and builds them together again, puts them back together. But he hasn't breathed his breath into them yet. That's still coming. Perhaps after the fullness of the Gentiles have come in. Yeah. Where are we? So then you will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and raise you from your graves, my people. Then I will place my breath in you, and you will live. I will give you rest in your land. Then you will know that I am the Lord. I have spoken, and I will act, declares the Lord. And so, all of Israel will be saved. Now, again, when exactly that happens, not 100% sure. It may come sometime during this period, but certainly their ultimate salvation will come at the moment that they see Jesus return. A moment that God describes in Zechariah 12. He says, "On that day, the Lord himself will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the weakest among them will be like mighty David." That's here, right? That's the end of the tribulation period, 3.5 years. All the nations have come against Jerusalem to destroy them and to once and for all wipe out the Jewish people. But on that day, the Lord himself will defend them. On that day, I will set out to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. I will pour out on the house of David and on the population of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication, so that they will look to me, the one they have pierced. They will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son, and there will be a bitter cry for him, like the bitter cry for a firstborn. And so that, I think, is the moment when Israel finally accepts Jesus, the one they crucified, the one they pierced, as their Lord, God, and Savior. And so I think that is also when God, having saved Israel physically, right, because he himself is going to defend them and destroy the armies, the nations that have come against Jerusalem, so he's going to save them physically. I think that that's also when God's going to bring them to life spiritually and breathe his breath into them, which is exciting, something to look forward to. But that's not the end as far as God's promises to Israel go. If we go back to Ezekiel, God carries on. This is what the sovereign says. "Look, I am about to take the Israelites from among the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from round about and bring them to their land. I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel, and one king will rule over them all. They will never again be 2 nations and never again be divided into 2 kingdoms. They will not defile themselves with their idols, their detestable things, and all their rebellious deeds. I will save them from all their unfaithfulness by which they sinned. I will purify them. They will become my people, and I will become their God." Now, at this point, we could jump to Jeremiah, where God says that a time is coming when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and Judah. What was the old covenant? The law. What was the law? What was that covenant? What did it involve? 613 commandments. 10 of which were the 10 commandments. Yeah. So there's this law, right? Carefully worked out, and if you do all of these things, then I will bless you. And if you don't do these things, well, yeah, history. So he says, okay, that's the old covenant. I'm going to make a new covenant with who? the people of Israel and Judah. It won't be like the old covenant that I made with their ancestors when I delivered them from Egypt, for they violated that covenant, even though I was like a faithful husband to them, says the Lord. But I will make a new covenant with the whole nation of Israel after I plant them back in the land, says the Lord. I will put my law within them and write it on their hearts and minds. That really is the issue, right? At the moment. Yeah, we know God's law, but it's not our heart, right? Our heart is like opposed to God's law. And so it's this constant battle. And we looked at that in Romans 7, this battle between our flesh and what it desires and God's law. But he's saying this is going to be different because now God's law will be on their hearts and minds. They'll actually want to obey it and want to do it, right? I will be their God and they will be my people. People will no longer need to teach their neighbors and relatives to know me. For all of them, from the least important to the most important, will know me, says the Lord. For I will forgive their sin and will no longer call to mind the wrong they have done. And so now God has breathed his spirit into his people and they've been brought to life. And all of them, it says, from the least important to the most important, will know God. You won't have to tell anybody about God. Why not? Why will they all know God? Back to Ezekiel. They will have one king. One king will rule over them all. Kind of sounds like Lord of the Rings. The one ring to rule. Anyway, but the reason that everybody's going to know God and you're not going to have to tell anybody about him is because he's going to be there, right? He will be their king. Jesus will be their king in Jerusalem. They will go to worship him. Yeah? Yeah. They'll visit him and worship him in Jerusalem, and so will everybody else. Check out this passage in, where is it? Oh no. I might not. Micah. In future days, the Lord's Temple Mount will be the most important mountain of all. It will be more prominent than other hills. People will stream to it. Many nations will come, saying, "Come on, let's go up to the Lord's mountain, to the temple of Jacob's God, so he can teach us his ways and we can live by his laws." You see what's...
A long queue.
Pretty much, right? This is not something that's ever happened, and it's not something I see happening outside of the millennial kingdom. That the Lord's Temple Mount is the most prominent, it's the most important mountain in all the world, and all the nations come to it to, listen to him. So that Jesus can teach them his ways, tell them what he wants them to do, and so that we can live by his laws. Which is quite cool. Okay. So, yeah. And then check out this passage in Isaiah. God says, "Arise, shine, for your light arrives." He's speaking to Israel. "The splendor of the Lord shines on you. For look, darkness covers the earth and deep darkness covers the nation. But the Lord shines on you. His splendor appears over you. Nations come to your light, kings to your bright light. Look all around. They all gather and come to you. Your sons come from far away and your daughters are escorted by guardians. Then you will look and smile. You will be excited and your heart will swell with pride. For the riches of the distant lands will belong to you and the wealth of nations will come to you." That phrase, the riches of distant lands will belong to you. Does that remind you of a promise we've looked at a few times through Romans? That God made to Abraham? Well, that Paul says God made to Abraham. Remember what it was? That you will inherit the world. Yeah, this is part of that. Apparently, the riches of distant nations will belong to Israel. And there's this amazing picture here of basically the world, right? And it's all in darkness, but the light is in Jerusalem. It's an immense bright light. The light for all the world is found in Jerusalem, and all the nations come to that light. What do you think is going on? Because I don't think there's literally going to be darkness over the earth. What do you think it's talking about? Yeah, that's your word is a light into my path. What is it talking about? Yeah, so it's knowledge, right? That brings light. You were a light to the world, right? Don't hide your light under a basket. So it's not talking about literal light. It's using light as an analogy for truth, right? And so the single source of Jacinda, the single source of truth. But now there is a single source of truth. It's in Jerusalem and it's Jesus. And all the nations, in comparison to that bright light in Israel, are in darkness, and they have to come to Israel to receive the light. That's the picture that's given here. And so, arise, shine, and you'll smile and be excited. Your heart will swell with pride because you, Israel, are the light of the world, which is amazing, right? Okay. And then there's this verse, a few verses later. God says, the splendor of Lebanon will come to you, its evergreens, firs, and cypresses together, to beautify my palace. I will bestow honor on my throne room. The children of your oppressors will come bowing to you. All who treated you with disrespect will bow down at your feet. They will call you the city of the Lord, Zion of the Holy One of Israel. You were once abandoned and despised, with no one passing through, but I will make you a permanent source of pride and joy to coming generations. Cool. Now, something that's kind of interesting to me in this verse, the splendor of Lebanon. What's the splendor of Lebanon? Trees. So Lebanon were known for their trees. Their cedar tree was particularly famous. Very good quality wood. And that's what it says, right? The splendor of Lebanon will come to you, its evergreens, firs, and cypress. I think one of those is a cedar tree. All their different trees. And King Solomon used cedar trees from Lebanon to build the temple, and also to build the palace, his palace, because they were the most valuable of all the trees that were available nearby. And it was obviously wood's very important at that time for building. So anyway, and in fact, Solomon called his palace the palace of the forest of Lebanon, because it was built out of the trees from Lebanon, right? And so you have this picture here of the trees from Lebanon being brought to Israel. Why? What does it say? To beautify my palace and to bestow honor on my throne room. I think that's kind of strange to even think about. I don't know if how many of you have been to Europe and walked through the palaces there? They're quite cool. But imagine what Jesus' palace is going to be like. And apparently he'll use the trees from Lebanon to build it and to make it beautiful. And then he says, the children of your oppressors will come bowing to you. Now that I think is quite interesting, because Lebanon, so that's Israel and that's Lebanon. And it's interesting, so Lebanon, that's their flag. It's got, that's a cedar tree, because that's what they're known for, right? That's their greatest treasure. And so they're up in the north of Israel. Technically, Lebanon and Israel are at war today. They're home to what's called Hezbollah, which is a massive military, terrorist army that are located in Lebanon that don't recognize Israel as a nation at all. They don't believe they have a right to exist as a nation. They're funded by Iran, who have vowed to wipe Israel off the map, and many believe are urgently trying to develop nuclear weapons for exactly that reason. Because Israel's actually tiny as a space. It's, I think, something like the North Island north of Auckland. And so they call themselves a one-bomb country. One nuclear bomb, Israel is gone. And so they're very concerned about Iran. Anyway, the point is, I find it interesting that God says that the children of your oppressors will come and bow at your feet. Today, Lebanon are one of the countries that are against and oppressing the Jewish people, or certainly would like to if they had enough gunpowder. But apparently the children of the Lebanese are going to bring their trees, right, their treasures to Israel, to Jerusalem, to Jesus, and are going to be essentially subject to the Jewish people and to Israel.
Bomb Israel, it hit like Lebanon. Like with a nuclear bomb, they'd hit like around it, surely.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how wide it would. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway. So that brings me to one more story before we go on. This week I was reading the Gospels and I noticed something that I actually hadn't noticed before, it's always exciting. So Jesus was born where? Bethlehem. Yes, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. The shepherds came and worshipped him there, right? And then God had, according to God's law, the Mosaic law, the Old Covenant, parents were supposed to go to Jerusalem and offer a sacrifice 40 days after a child was born, right? And Mary and Joseph, they're good Jewish people. They do what they're supposed to. And so 40 days after Jesus was born, they leave Bethlehem, they travel to Jerusalem to offer that sacrifice. So they take Jesus and they travel to Jerusalem. Now, in bigger context, this most likely happened before the wise men came. So we have the nativity scene and there's the shepherds and the wise men and they're all around the crib in the stable in Bethlehem. But what we think actually happened is on the night, Jesus and Mary are in the stable Joseph and Mary are in the stable with Jesus. The shepherds come, they worship Jesus. They then go. Then we think Mary and Joseph must actually have decided, okay, well, this is home, right? Let's stay here. They probably had problems up in Nazareth anyway because, talking mouths and things like that. And so we think they stayed in Bethlehem, then came to Jerusalem to offer their sacrifice, would have gone back to Bethlehem afterwards, back to where they were going to establish their home. Then the wise men come. Herod finds out about Jesus, tries to kill him by killing all the children in that whole region, in the region of Bethlehem, which is when Joseph and Mary are told by God to flee to Egypt, right? And so it's unlikely that they would have come to Jerusalem with Herod trying to kill their son they fled to Egypt. And it's also the sacrifice that they offer when they're at the temple in Jerusalem is 2 pigeons. And that was the offering prescribed for people who couldn't afford a sheep. And one of the gifts of the wise men was gold. So we think it's unlikely that after the wise men had visited, they wouldn't have been able to afford a sheep. So anyway, that's not that relevant, but just so you have a picture. So anyway, this is before the wise men come. Mary and Joseph have gone to Jerusalem with Jesus. They've gone to the temple to offer this sacrifice, the sacrifice of purification that they were supposed to do. And while they're there, they encounter this old man called Simeon. Old man named Simeon, and apparently the Holy Spirit had told Simeon that he would see the Lord's Messiah before he died. That he wouldn't die before he had seen the Lord's Messiah. And so then Luke says, Simeon took Jesus, when he saw Jesus with Mary and Joseph, God obviously indicated to him that this is who I was talking about. And so Simeon took Jesus in his arms and blessed God, saying, "Now, according to your word, sovereign Lord, permit your servant to depart in peace. Let me die now. I'm old. For my eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, and for the glory to your people Israel." And here's what I found interesting that I hadn't really thought about before. Simeon said that Jesus would be a light. Comes back to kind of what we were talking about before. A light for revelation to the Gentiles. What does that mean? What does it mean to be a revelation? You reveal something, right? He's going to reveal something, and what do you think he's going to reveal to the Gentiles? Yeah, salvation, truth, right? He's the light. He's going to reveal God's word to the Gentiles. And Jesus has absolutely done that, right? We're sitting here as Gentiles today reading his word. Jesus revealed that to us. So that's fine. But that's not all Simeon said. He said he will be a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel. And so my question is, so far, has Jesus brought glory to the people of Israel in the way that you would sort of think he's talking about? Not really. Not really. And so that I think is still coming. That's what we were talking about before. In the millennial kingdom, when he's the light, right, and he's going to bring glory to Israel, all the world is going to come to Israel to see this light. Zephaniah, God says, "Be sure of this. I will make the nations of the earth respect and admire you when you see me restore you, says the Lord." And so that, I think, is when that's going to happen.
You know your rainbow's connection.
Uh-huh.
Have you been adding to that?
Yes, we'll see at the end.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. So when Jesus restores Israel to himself and he establishes his kingdom through them, then Jesus will be the glory of Israel, and Israel will be glorified through him. And all the nations will come and admire Israel and come to Jerusalem to honor their king. And everybody who treated Israel with disrespect will bow at their feet. And so that's the millennial kingdom of Christ, and the salvation of Israel. Israel's future destiny, which is pretty cool. Okay, now we'll go on with Romans 11. Cool. Does somebody want to read?
I'll read from 28.
Yes.
In regard to the gospel, they are enemies for your sake, but in regard to election, they are dearly loved for the sake of the fathers. For the gifts and the call of God are irrevocable. Just as you were formerly disobedient to God, but have now received mercy due to their disobedience, so they too have now been disobedient in order that, by the mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. For God has consigned all people to disobedience, so that he may show mercy to them all.
Okay. So basically, Paul is continuing to explain the situation as it currently exists. Yes, for the time being, Israel are enemies of the gospel. And Paul certainly knew that better than most people, because basically everywhere he went and tried to share the gospel, the Jews tried to kill him. But it says that God has allowed that to happen. Why? In regard to the gospel, they're enemies. For our sake, right? For your sake. That's what Paul said back in verse 11, that by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Israel as a nation were allowed to fall from their favored position with God so that we as Gentiles could gain access to him. And so that, as we've looked at, that should bring a deep sense of humility in us, right? Not pride, but like humbleness, that God would allow such a tragedy to befall his beloved Israel for our sakes. And I guess more than anything, we should make the absolute most of every opportunity, the immense privilege that we've been given. But anyway, just because God has allowed Israel for a time to become enemies of the gospel, that does not mean that they are no longer God's chosen people. Because, well, no, Israel remain dearly loved for the sake of the fathers. And that really gets to like the heart of everything which we've been talking about, probably across all three chapters, is that the gifts and call of God are irrevocable. God made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his covenants, his callings, his promises are irrevocable. What does that mean? Yeah, you can, no takesies backsies. Yeah. You said it, you got to do it, right? Why? Numbers 23, God is not a man that he should lie, nor a human being that he should change his mind. Has he said and will he not do it? Or has he promised and will he not make it happen? The answer is no, right? No, God will do what he said he will do. And if he's promised it, he will make it happen. And so Israel will never lose their place as God's chosen people, his beloved nation. But you should realize that that's not because they've earned that place or because they deserve that place. It's because that is what God promised Abraham. Genesis 17, God says, I will confirm my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you. It will extend to your descendants after you throughout their generations. I will be your God and the God of your descendants after you. And then a few verses later, God said, Sarah, your wife, is going to bear a son, and you will name him Isaac. Bless you. I will confirm my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. Now, so God says, this is an everlasting covenant, an eternal promise that I'm making to you. What would God be if he didn't keep his promise? And all the other promises that he made to Abraham and the rest of Israel. What are you if you don't keep your promises? A liar. Yeah, exactly. That is why God will never reject Israel, regardless of what they've done, because his reputation is at stake. There's this moment in the wilderness. So Israel have been brought out of Egypt, right? And they've been brought to the mountain of God, Mount Sinai. And Moses has gone up that mountain to meet with God. And he's been up there 40 days. And basically, Israel down below decide he must be dead. And so they do what? Yep. So they start worshipping a golden calf. And the Lord, who's up the mountain with Moses has no idea what's going on, but God knows what's going on. He says to Moses, how long will this people despise me? How long will they not believe in me in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? And for context, it's about 2 months, probably a little bit less than 2 months since they were brought out of Egypt. So you can think like August this year. You saw the 10 plagues that absolutely left Egypt in ruins. You crossed through the Red Sea on dry ground and then watched the entire Egyptian army get washed away. God's been feeding you with manna and water from a rock for 2 months since August. And now Moses must be dead. Right? And so God says to Moses, I will strike them with pestilence and I will disinherit them. I will make you into a nation that is greater and mightier than they are. So basically God says to Moses, get out of the way. I'm done with them. I'm going to wipe them out. I'll make a better nation out of you. Now, what I find so interesting to see is how Moses responds to God, what he says to God. He doesn't appeal to God's mercy or his love. He doesn't try to apologize for Israel, explain them away, nor does he say look, realistically, my children are not going to be any better than they are, right? We're all human. He doesn't do any of this. This is what Moses says. If you kill this entire people all at once, then the nations that have heard of your fame will say, it was because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land that he swore to them that he killed them in the wilderness. So what is he appealing to?
His promises.
And? Why not?
Because other nations.
Yeah. He basically says you can't do that, right? What will the nations think of you if you do that? So he appeals to God's reputation, right? Which I think is quite interesting. Basically says your reputation will be ruined if you destroy your people. Now, just for the record, I don't think God actually ever intended to destroy Israel. I think he intended for Moses to respond in exactly the way that he did and to say exactly what he did. But the point is, God cannot reject Israel, not so much for Israel's sake, but for his own name's sake. And he says exactly that in Ezekiel, chapter before the one we were looking at, actually a couple places. God says, you will despise yourselves because of all the evil deeds you have done. Then you will know that I am the Lord when I deal with you for the sake of my reputation and not according to your wicked conduct and your corrupt deeds, O house of Israel, declares the Lord. See what he's saying? I'm not going to treat you the way you deserve to be treated. Why? My reputation, for the sake of my reputation. In Ezekiel 36, he says, therefore, to Ezekiel, say to the house of Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says. It is not for your sake that I am about to act, O house of Israel, but for the sake of my holy reputation, which you have profaned among the nations where you went. Understand that it is not for your sake I am about to act, declares the sovereign Lord. Be ashamed and embarrassed by your behavior, O house of Israel. So it's pretty clear, right? Whatever Israel have done or not done, and whatever they deserve or don't deserve, God is going to act. God is going to fulfill his promises to them, not for their sake, but for the sake of his holy name. And so God will never reject Israel. There's this passage in Jeremiah 33 that I thought was so cool. The Lord's message came to Jeremiah another time. You have surely noticed what the people are saying, haven't you? They're saying the Lord has rejected the two families of Israel and Judah that he chose. That's unbelievably relevant, right? And true. They have little regard that my people will ever again be a nation, but I, the Lord, make the following promise. I have made a covenant governing the coming of day and night. I have established the fixed laws governing heaven and earth. Just as surely as I have done this, so surely will I never reject the descendants of Jacob. Done. As Paul said, the gifts and the call of God are irrevocable. Cool. Okay, and so then at this point, after 3 chapters, Paul starts to pull it all together and explain big picture what's going on, what this has all been about. He says, just as you were formerly disobedient to God, but have now received mercy due to their disobedience, so they too now have been disobedient in order that by the mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. So basically he's saying, like, how are they any different to you? You were disobedient and you received my mercy. And that's Titus 3. But when the kindness of God our Savior and his love for mankind appeared, he saved us, not by works of righteousness that we have done, but on the basis of his mercy, through the washing of the new birth and the renewing of the Holy Spirit, whom he poured out on us in full measure through Jesus Christ our Savior. So, we're disobedient, we received God's mercy. And so, now he has allowed Israel also to become disobedient. Now, Israel were always disobedient, but they didn't know they were disobedient. In their minds, in their eyes, and we've looked at this, they thought they were righteous. They had God's law. They were trying to keep God's law, and so they didn't think they needed God's mercy. If you remember last week, when Jesus is like hammering the Pharisees, he's saying, like, you give 1/10 of your mint, dill, and cumin, right? So they're feeling proud because they tithe even their spices. But your heart, right, you reject reject mercy, justice, and these sorts of things. And so they were clean, they looked righteous to other people, but And so they actually thought that they were righteous themselves. They're like this Pharisee that Jesus talked about, and he said, when he said, there's this Pharisee who stood and prayed about himself like this: God, I thank you that I am not like other people. Not a good prayer to pray. Extortionists, unrighteous people, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of everything I get. That's Israel. Jesus says the tax collector stood far away, and he wouldn't even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, God, be merciful to me, sinner that I am. I tell you that this man went down to his home justified rather than the Pharisee. That's the problem. The Jewish people were blind to their own sin. They were proud of their apparent righteousness, confident in their position as the chosen people of God. So somehow God needed Israel to see their sin, right? To recognize their need for God's mercy. And so he allowed Israel to be broken off from their olive tree, to fall from the favor of God, to become obviously, willfully, and visibly disobedient, so that they would realize their need for mercy and cry out to God to save them. And so Paul says God has assigned all people to disobedience so that he could show mercy to them all. And that's what God has been accomplishing through all of this. And so that then, basically, no one in heaven will ever be able to say, like, I did this, right? I deserve this. Everybody in heaven will be there by the amazing grace and the inexhaustible mercy of God. And in seeing all of this come together, Paul finishes with praise. He says, "Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and how unfathomable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, and who has been his counselor? Or who has first given to God that God needs to repay him? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen." So like I said, Paul, in seeing all of this come together and seeing what God's doing here, he gets like this glimpse of the wisdom of God. And basically says this is something amazing and not something that anybody would have guessed or imagined. And he quotes a couple verses from the Old Testament. The first one comes from Isaiah. "Who comprehends the mind of the Lord or gives instruction as his counselor? From whom does he receive directions? Who teaches him the correct way to do things or imparts knowledge to him?" Answer? Who can comprehend the mind of God? Who can give him instruction? Who's God's counselor? Can say, this is the right way to do things? Obviously no one. And I guess along the journey that we've been going through since Romans 9, we may at times have been tempted to question God's wisdom. If you think back in Romans 9, there was the clay saying to the potter, "What are you doing?" Right? And there may have been a temptation for us to do that, but here Paul's saying look, see, God knew what he was doing. He had a plan. And the reality is, however smart we think we are, we have no ability to comprehend the wisdom of God beyond that which he explains to us in his word and reveals to us through his Spirit. 1 Corinthians 1, Paul says, the foolishness of God. Now, God is never foolish, but if he were, even his foolishness would be wiser than the wisest men. And the weakness of God is stronger than human strength. So, we can't counsel God. He doesn't need our advice. Nor does he owe us anything. Who has first given to God that God needs to repay him? Here Paul's quoting from the book of Job, where God is speaking to Job, and he says, who has sued me so that I have to pay them back, right? So that I have to repay them. Everything under heaven belongs to me. And when I read that, I can't help but think of Psalm 50, where God says, I don't need to take a bull from your household or goats from your sheepfold. Every wild animal in the forest belongs to me, as well as the cattle that graze on 1,000 hills. I keep track of every bird in the hills, and the insects of the field are mine. Even if I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you, for the world and all it contains belongs to me, right? So in other words, there's nothing we can give to God that we haven't already received from him. Everything that we have is a gift from God. And so if you're giving something if you're giving something to God, all you're doing is giving it back to him, right? It was his in the first place. Because all things are from him and through him and to him. As Paul said to the Galatians, Jesus, he is the image of the invincible God, the firstborn over all creation. For all things in heaven and on earth were created by him. All things, whether visible or invisible, whether thrones or rulers, whether principalities or powers. And those words, principalities or powers, usually relate to like spiritual dimensions, angels, demons, these sorts of things. All things were created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and all things are held together in him. So all things were created by Jesus and are held together in Jesus and are for the glory of Jesus, including our salvation, because our salvation wasn't our idea, wasn't from us, it was from Jesus. It wasn't achieved through us. It was achieved through Jesus, and arguably, it wasn't really for us, perhaps. It was for Jesus. It says, to the praise of the glory of his grace. And so, to him be glory forever, and all who agree say, Amen. And so we finished. That's Romans 11. Now, if you're interested, this far through the book of Romans, we have looked at basically 800 other passages, 799, from more than 300 chapters in the Bible. So we've looked at a quarter of all the chapters in the Bible, and we've looked at 52 out of the 66 books, so all but 14. There's still 14 we need to get to, obviously. That's Psalm 119, the longest chapter in the Bible. So anyway, so it's pretty cool. And just again, the whole point of this is just to illustrate that when we're studying the book of Romans, you can never just study one book in the Bible. Wherever you are, it's all interconnected. God's word is all woven together. From the very first chapter of the Bible to the very last chapter of the Bible, it's all interconnected. And anywhere you start, you're going to end up everywhere else. So anyway, that's where we've managed to get to so far in chapter 11. At this point, Paul is basically done with the theory. He's done with the theory of our salvation, and he's explained to us the theory of Israel's salvation. And now it gets much more practical. In fact, the first verse of the next chapter is, the first word of the next chapter is therefore, which means?
Something is, we have to figure out why it's
what is the therefore? But it's following on from what's just been said, right? Yeah, in light of all of this, therefore, this is how we should live, right? And now it becomes way more practical in terms of how we should live in light of everything that God's done for us. Cool. Okay. And so we'll talk about this in a sec, but we can pray first, and then I'll ask some advice. Lord God, thank you so much for your amazing word, Lord. I thank you so much that you have revealed your plans to us, Lord, at least in some way, in some little way that our finite minds can to some extent comprehend. I thank you for the peace that gives us, knowing that our future is certain and secure. You know how the story ends, Lord, and you've got it all under control, and that you're working all things together for our salvation. I ask that you would help us to live with that sort of knowledge and expectation, Lord, and excitement to see what you want to do in our life, Lord, and what you plan to accomplish through us this side of eternity. and for the hope that we have for the other side of eternity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, so my question is, there are 5 weeks left before Christmas that we have the youth service. And there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chapters left. So, personally, I'd really like to finish Romans this year because we've been going through it for ages. We did, like April last year. So I think it would be quite nice to finish these off rather than to get, halfway through Romans 13 or something and then have to start back again in February. It'd be quite cool in February to start something new. So I guess first 2 options is 1, we keep going through it as we have been through the remaining chapters. And so we just get as far as we get before Christmas and then we come back in February and we carry on to the end. And I don't know when that'll be. Hopefully in the first half of next year. That's the one option. The second option is we go through these 5 chapters at a much higher, surface level. Basically, try to do a chapter a week, read through the chapter, and then just pick out a few parts that are like the most interesting maybe and talk about those in a bit more detail, but not go through it because we've basically been going through line by line. I think that's been necessary because every line is there, Paul has been you're building you can't just skip a chapter in your textbook because you won't understand stuff, right? So I think it is important, but perhaps less critical in these chapters. So that's the other option. We just basically chapter a week, pick a few things to talk about in a bit more detail. What's your preference? Hands up for option 1. Option 1 is keep going through verse by verse. Maybe thumb up. And finger up if you want to go chapter by chapter and finish before Christmas. That's cheating. That's also not helpful. Okay, keep them up. Sorry, I'm going to look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2. Okay. So preference is to finish before Christmas. So then the next question is, if we do it that way, if we do a chapter a week, and we just pick out some stuff to talk about, should we do it as a teaching like this, or should we just discuss it? Sit around and basically read through the chapter, and you guys tell me what parts you think are interesting, and we talk about them. Option 1, option 2.
One is him teaching and 2 is actually discussing.
Yeah, put your fingy up, bro.
3, 4,
That's kind of sus.
6, 7, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
James, can I get lunch?
Okay. Preference is discussion. Cool. Okay. All right, thank you. We'll give that a go next week and see how we manage. And then we can always reevaluate and we can always change it. But cool. Thanks.
Sick. Yeah, thank you.
No worries.